The North Atlantic coast is an incredibly hostile environment. Long before the first European settlers arrived, the barrier islands of modern-day North Carolina were defined by violent storms, treacherous shoals, and shifting sands. When Governor John White returned to Roanoke Island in August of 1590, he found a settlement entirely stripped of life. Over 100 English men, women, and children were gone. The houses were carefully dismantled. There were no bodies and no signs of a struggle. All that remained of the colony was the word CROATOAN carved into a wooden post. Finding physical evidence at the original site has proven nearly impossible. The outer banks are eroding rapidly into the surf, taking centuries of archaeological artifacts with them into the ocean. In the absence of artifacts, a massive cultural myth took root. For over 400 years, plays, novels, and television shows have framed Roanoke as a ghost story, an entire population evaporating into thin air. Human beings do not magically disappear. While written history failed to solve the mystery of the abandoned fort, treating Roanoke as a modern cold case reveals a chain of evidence that points to a specific, logical outcome. The first breakthrough comes from dendrochronology, or the study of tree rings. In the swamps of the Carolinas, ancient bald cypress trees have stood for over 2,000 years. These trees act like biological hard drives, recording centuries of environmental data. Looking closely at a cross-section of these trees reveals a distinct biological pattern. The shape and width of each annual growth ring changes depending on the weather. A moist growing season produces a wide ring, while a dry season or a harsh winter results in a very narrow ring. By counting backward, climatologists pinpointed the exact years the Roanoke colonists were stranded, 1587 through 1589. The ring data reveals these specific years align perfectly with the most severe drought the region had experienced in an 800-year period. The English settlers were facing an ecological disaster, total agricultural collapse, and imminent starvation. Compounding this disaster was a complete logistical breakdown across the Atlantic. Governor John White's attempt to bring supplies back from England was immediately halted by scarce and variable winds, and shortly after, the threat of the Spanish Armada locked his rescue ships in port. Even after the immediate Spanish threat subsided, White's rescue expedition was delayed by extensive privateering and several sea battles. This left the Roanoke colonists completely stranded for 3 agonizing years. Crops were failing, local streams were drying up, and the horizon remained completely empty. At a certain point, the realization set in that the Crown had abandoned them. Taking down the houses and leaving the fort was a calculated, desperate decision to avoid starvation by seeking outside help. When people face starvation, they seek out those with local knowledge. In this case, that meant heading south to Hatteras Island, the home of the CROATOAN people, a tribe that had previously been friendly to the English. Recent bioarchaeological excavations on Hatteras have uncovered physical evidence of this cooperation. The artifacts suggest English and native communities began sharing food sources and landscape knowledge to survive the record-breaking drought. Proving where the colonists ended up requires looking at modern DNA. While European Y chromosomes are common in many native groups due to 18th century trade and the expansion of the American frontier, researchers have identified a specific anomaly along the coast. In descendant populations like the Lumbee, up to 96% of certain lineages carry European Y chromosomes, an unprecedented frequency pointing to an early infusion of European DNA. Historically, diseases reduced native male populations, prompting tribes to adopt stranded European men into their structure. These combined records suggest the Roanoke colonists were rescued by and eventually integrated into the Native American gene pool. With ecological and genetic evidence in hand, the CROATOAN carving is no longer a cryptic puzzle. It was a prearranged message telling Governor John White exactly where the survivors had gone to find food and shelter. A societal preference for tragic mystery helped the vanishing myth persist for centuries. Figures like Virginia Dare were romanticized as icons of a pure, lost English colony, rather than the reality of survivors who adapted through cross-cultural assimilation. The true history of the Roanoke colony is one of human resilience and cooperation in the face of a climate crisis. The Roanoke settlers survived by becoming part of the land and its people. Their legacy is recorded in the ancient tree rings, buried in the Hatteras soil, and alive in the DNA of their descendants today.